Hi, I'm George Bull, and I'm going to be talking about overlanding with younger kids. I've been overlanding for 25 years now. I've done London to Cape Town, Trans-Africa. I've done various trips in Southern Africa from Kenya to South Africa. I've overlanded out west, in the Southwest, in Europe, in the Northeast. So I've been doing a lot of overlanding for the past 25 years. And I've got kids that are my son, George, who is 9, and my daughter, Imogen, who is 5. And from almost the day they were born, we've been overlanding with them. And if you had told me 25 years ago that I'd be overlanding with kids, I would have told you you're crazy. But what I can say is there's one takeaway from this whole talk that I'm about to do, is if you enjoy overlanding and you're thinking about taking kids, just do it. It's totally worth it. And one of the things that people say is they're always waiting for a better age. I'm gonna take my kids when they, are potty trained, or when they're at this age or that age. And what I've found is that every age is a good age, and there is no bad age to travel with kids or with people for that matter. But it's really important not to get fixated on waiting for the perfect time to travel with kids, because you'll never have it, and you only have one opportunity to travel with your kids, and they're never going to be 9 and 5 anymore. And to give you an idea, we started traveling with my son. We took a Unimog and did camping when he was 4 weeks old, and my daughter Imogen was flying transatlantically when she was a month old. So you can start at a very young age. In some ways, actually, when they're really small, that's a really good time because they're almost like baggage, and you can bring them along, but you can also start getting into a groove with kids right from the get-go, and they'll get used to it and acclimatize to travel, and you'll get used to traveling with them, and as they get older, you can evolve. Again, you don't have to start when they're young, but it's totally doable. Another thing people say is like, oh, the kids are not gonna remember what we're gonna do, so why go out and do these things if they don't remember them? And what I would say is that travel is part of one's life story, so even though children don't necessarily remember what they did, they are constantly reminded and told, and they're like family stories, whatever, so it does become a part of them, and it defines who they are. So my daughter, Imogen, who is now 5 and who was 2.5 when we were in Botswana, does not remember a lot of traveling in Botswana, but she will tell people that she's been to Africa and she's seen real elephants and not the kind in cages. So that's already in her little mind defining or partially defining who she is. So don't worry about the fact that they may or may not remember stuff. Another thing is that people say, oh man, kids are gonna make things so much more complicated. It's gonna be so much harder. So kids are not a liability, and you can't treat them as a liability. For example, when you're overlanding, you can just take the highway, and that's the easiest way to go, or you can go off-road, which is going to be a lot more challenging, but is going to be more rewarding. And that's kind of like how it is with kids. There is a little bit more work involved in it. You do have to make accommodations for your kids that you otherwise wouldn't have to make. But likewise, there's so many rewarding things that you'll encounter when you travel with kids. And just seeing them travel and learn in itself is a great payment. Another thing to consider, though, is that, at least for us, overlanding is not a vacation. So vacations are all about kind of having fun, having, kind of clocking out and having a stress-free, enjoyable time. So going to the beach or maybe going to a theme park, that's a vacation. Overlanding is more of an adventure, and as a result, you can't have the expectation that your overlanding is going to be a vacation. It's not to say that it's not going to be fun, you gotta have fun, but likewise, you don't want your kids and yourself to treat an overlanding event or a trip like it's going to be a vacation and you're not going to have problems and there's not going to be stress. It's real important to take that into account. And on a similar level, you know, you can't have like forced fun. We call it FFF, family forced fun. You can't set the expectation that everything's going to be fun, that the kids are going to have a good time, that you're going to have a good time, and everything's going to fall into place, because that just doesn't happen. It doesn't usually even happen on vacations, but it definitely doesn't happen in overlanding. So one of the important things is don't set your expectations so high like that every day is going to be an amazing day, every experience is going to be amazing, because it doesn't really pan out like that. And if you're disappointed, your kids will get that. And that's another thing. It's important to be positive, because your kids will kind of get the feedback from you. So even if things aren't going as you planned and you weren't able to go where you wanted to go, or the vehicle is not running the way you wanted, or there's some sort of issue, you got to try to be as positive as possible with traveling with kids, because they really tune into that. And they also tune into really positive energy. So what we try to do is, you know, make lemonade out of lemons and put a positive spin on it. And, you know, that ironically sometimes works for us just as well as it works for the kids. In terms of things that you can do that are going to make traveling with younger kids easier or better, or however you want to say it, one of the first things that I would say is planning. My wife and I, when we used to overland, we did not plan. We would do stuff spontaneously. Our itinerary could change dramatically in a very short period of time. And that's really the way we like to travel. And we couldn't really imagine any other way. Once we had kids, that kind of changed. And we went to Botswana, where we went to national parks where you need to have a reservation and you need to have an itinerary. You're not allowed to access some of these places. And in the beginning we thought, wow, that really kind of sucks, because that limits what we can do. But it forced us to make definitive plans. And what we found when we were actually traveling with the kids is that worked out great. Kids want to know, like, what to expect. How long are we going to be driving? Where are we going to be at the end of the night? And having a plan made it really easy for us to say, okay, today is going to be a long driving day, so be mentally prepared that we're not going to see lots of cool stuff. Or we could say, you know, it's going to be a real short drive. We're going to go, you know, through a park, and we're going to see animals, and we'll be at the hotel or the campsite or wherever we're spending the night by 5. Kids really like that. They like that structure. And so what I would say is the planning really pays off. So another thing with traveling with kids is to slow down. There's a temptation to get as much in a day as possible. You know, when we were younger, especially my wife and I, we would cover quite often a lot of ground, do a lot of things in kind of in condensed periods. And we found that that doesn't work with the kids. Kids can only absorb so much, and then it kind of starts to become counterproductive. So what we've done is we've slowed everything down. We drive less, so we have, you know, maybe 3 hours in the car max, and then we have a break. We do 3 hours after, and we just slow our whole pace down, and we don't try to nail a lot of things in a day. So one of the things that's important when you're overlanding with kids, especially younger kids, is to kind of keep it magic and keep the kids engaged. So for example, what we do is we went to Colorado, did Colorado Rockies. We did a lot of off-road, but we went to a lot of ghost towns. And so that kind of kept the kids engaged. They were curious about the ghost towns. My wife and I got to do some really fun technical driving, but likewise, we had places to stop, places to go, and it engaged the kids' imagination. When we go to Europe, sometimes we do castles. So we'll go to various castles and the theme is castles. And again, the kids, it gets their imagination going and they think about the medieval times, or they think about with the ghost towns, like the people that lived in different places. You know, and when we were in Africa, obviously there are animals and there's how many animals can you spot? But that keeps the kids engaged, and it also keeps their creativity and their imagination so that it's an exploration for them and they're not just, you know, sitting in a car watching the world go by. In terms of things that you can do as well in logistics and making things better logistically, especially if you haven't done much overlanding or camping with your kids and you're thinking actually you'd like to do that, is don't go out and do a big trip. Do like a dry run. So for example, we were doing Colorado in our LR3. We used different vehicles for different trips, and we had never really used the LR3, and we were gonna, all four of us, be in that vehicle. So what we actually did is we did a run into the Maine North Woods and spent about 4 days camping / overlanding. And we immediately realized we were bringing way too much stuff. There were things that the kids wanted that we didn't have, and there were lots of things that we brought that they didn't want. We started to realize how the space in the back of the vehicle was working, how we could kind of divide the kids. So we did that whole dry run so that by the time we were living out of the vehicle for more like 3 weeks in Colorado, we had a much better system. I wouldn't say it was perfect, but likewise, it worked out a lot better. So doing some practicing, like practice camping, and this might sound a little weird, but also, you know, just practicing peeing outside, especially for girls, because that's something you may have to do, and it's much better to do that at home than to put a kid on the spot on some campground. So the practice definitely helps, and we've found that packing light for kids as well, like our kids want to take every single stuffy they've got, and it's the end of the world if we don't bring, you know, one of them. And it turns out really that, you know, one stuffed animal is going to work for them. The amount of clothes, you know, you can wash kids' clothes pretty easy. You don't have to pack as much as you might think for kids. And on that note kind of as well, in not bringing too much clothes, is like embrace dirt. You know, kids are going to get dirty. You're gonna run around in circles if you try to keep them clean all the time. So, you know, obviously you have to be healthy, but likewise, our kids had dirty clothes, and, you know, we would wash their hands before we ate and we'd kind of clean them up. But likewise, we kind of gave up on trying to be like spotlessly clean at the end of every day. It's not like that they're gonna go to school the next day. So we definitely let the kids be a little dirtier, and that took a lot of pressure off of our daily routine. And in daily routines, another thing is to give kids responsibilities. They shouldn't just be like passive observers, or that's what we found anyway for our kids, is that when they're tasked to do stuff, then they feel like we're doing something as a team and they're engaged. So for example, you know, when we were in Botswana, my son was in charge of water. So he was the one that filled water bottles. He's also the one that made sure we didn't use too much water when we were washing dishes. We actually gave him a little bit of power, so he had control over the tap. Even our 2-year-old, we gave her some responsibilities of just cleaning up. And on one level, they kind of like, they don't like it, but on another level, it really kind of gets them involved. And it's important to keep them involved and engaged, and not that they're some peripheral thing on the side. Another thing we did that maybe different people have different philosophies on this, but we had some devices like an iPad that they could use. Normally we're not really big device people, we're not iPad people, we try to avoid screen time. But I have to say that allowing them to use an iPad when we were in particularly boring places, if we're just driving down the highway and there's really not much for them to do and there's not much for them to see, having something that they can engage in, if you don't want to do devices, you need to find something that they enjoy that they can do in the vehicle. For us, it was devices. For other people, it might be something different, but you definitely have to give kids an outlet to do other things other than just like being full on overlanding. And also on another level, don't try to make overlanding this big, massive teaching moment. You don't want your kids looking at it like it's curricula. Our kids learn a tremendous amount of things and they just absorb it. If we kind of impose like the cultural significance of something, or we want them to really like appreciate something, they tend to kind of push back a little bit, and then they start looking at it as a chore. So we don't try to put any pressure on our kids to learn stuff. Regardless, they learn tons of stuff. But we don't make that the point, even though that is what we want them to do. We want them to learn. Part of the whole reason we go overlanding with our kids is to expose them to different histories, different cultures, different environments. So we want them to learn, but likewise, we try not to make it a big learning exercise. One thing that I've found with overlanding with kids is if we're not having a good time as parents, our kids aren't going to have a good time. So we don't cater to what we think our children want to do. What we do is we define what we want to do as adults, what we would like to see, and then we see how we can integrate it and make it relevant for our kids as well. But if we don't want to go somewhere or we're not interested in a place, we don't go there just because it might be more suitable to take kids there. We try to do what we would have done anyway, but like I said, we try to incorporate it so that it's more kid-friendly. One thing that my wife and I have found to really work when we are overlanding with our kids is to revisit places that you've been. So quite often I go on site first and my wife will fly in with the children. So we did that in Colorado, we did that in Botswana. By default, that means we have to go back to the same airport. Well, we don't have to, but that's the way we plan it. So we go back to the same airport. So we end up doing a loop. And that was more to do with logistics when we originally started doing it, but we found that kids really like going back to a place they've been before. So quite often on our way back, we'll stay at the same campsite or the same hotel or one of the places where we had been before. And when they return back to it, it gives them a sense of place and they start to feel comfortable. So they really like going back. Also, in terms of destinations, so we kind of overland in Europe, and what we try to do is we spend a lot of time on the Rhine in Germany going to castles. We don't always go to the same castles, we go to different castles, but we go to the same region, and we kind of have the same theme. And they really like that, so they feel at home now kind of in Germany and in Holland. And we always go somewhere different, but it really helps to revisit. The kids really like to have a sense of place where they've been somewhere before. So we found that was kind of a side effect of our traveling, but that really helped. It's just to kind of do the same place, not 2 days in a row, but kind of like come back to where you were. Another thing that I want to kind of emphasize is don't push your limits. Don't push your personal limits. Don't push your vehicle's limits. And what do I mean by that? Like, don't try to do like your bucket list of hardcore off-roading trails or try to nail Alaska in January or the Sahara in the summer. I made that mistake on one of our first trips going into the Kalahari Desert in Botswana, and while it wasn't a life-threatening situation, it definitely got a little heavier than I was expecting. And when you're by yourself, you can take those risks a lot easier than when you're with kids. And with kids, it just really does amp up if things start going a bit wrong. You know, if you're just with your partner and everybody's in tune and everybody knows what to expect, and you get to a place where you're stuck or there's vehicle damage, you know, everybody kind of knows what the deal is. So it works out. But when you have little kids, they don't understand the bigger picture. What we've done is we don't try to push our vehicles to the limit. We don't try to push ourselves to the limit. I've still got a bucket list of places that I'm going to go. And we definitely make it challenging. So it's not that we're watering everything down, but we're just giving ourselves a bit more of a safety buffer. Because when things do kind of go bad with kids, it tends to go really bad because the kids they're not on the same page as everybody else. So my advice would be, especially if you're just starting off and you're just you're just thinking about doing this, is ease into it. We do progressively more challenging things every time we do things. The kids then get a sense of perspective as well, but don't go out there and do something, like a camel trophy type thing on the first time you take your kids out. Because it's also important when you're setting expectations with kids that they know, like I said earlier, that not everything's going to be fun, but likewise, everything can't be an extreme challenge. You know, you've got to break that up with some fun time and some off time, and not constantly be trying to conquer a trail or the terrain or whatever it may be. So overlanding with kids they're a total asset, and they add so much to overlanding. It's so worth doing, and it does take a little effort. Like I said, it's just like if you're going to go on an off-road trail as opposed to a highway. The off-road trail is going to be a little more challenging, but the rewards are so much greater. And with kids, the rewards are tremendous. Not just for the kids, but for me as a parent, I have more fun overlanding with my kids now than when I don't have my kids.